She came out of the dark and the snow, and she was already falling when she hit the door. Not a door as she had known doors. A hide stretched over a wooden frame and lashed with sinew, and she hit it with the flat of her fists, and her voice came out of her in a language the man inside would not know, and she knew this and said it anyway. "Let me in. Please let me in. I am freezing." She pressed her face against the hide, and the cold had taken her fingers some time before, and she could not feel the frame she gripped, and her knees were going, and she said it again, softer, because she had no more than that left. "Please." The hide moved. He was tall, and she saw that first, tall and dark in the firelight with his hair loose and a robe around his shoulders, and he looked at her the way a man looks at something he does not understand but is trying to. She was on her knees in the snow by then. She had not planned to be on her knees. "I have nothing," she said, "but I will find a way. I will reward you. Whatever you want." She said this in English because the Apache had left her and the Spanish had left her, and all she had was the language of the men who had taken everything else. He did not speak. He looked at her face and at her hands and at the snow that had packed itself into the weave of her dress, and he stepped back from the opening, and that was all. She crawled inside. The warmth hit her like a blow. Her body did not know what to do with it, and she shook on the ground beside his fire, and he crouched across from her and watched. Not the way men watched her. The way a man watches a horse that has run itself to ruin, with a kind of removed attention, measuring what is needed. He put a robe over her. Buffalo hide, heavy, smelling of smoke and animal, and the cold it had kept out of other bodies before hers. He tucked nothing. He did not touch her. He set it over her shoulders and stood and moved to the other side of the fire. She waited. She had learned to wait for what came after the kindness. The kindness was always a door, and behind the door was the same room she had been living in since the man named Greer had come to her family's camp with his papers and his deputies, and his notion of what an Apache woman was owed by the world. She watched Kohana from inside the robe. He was making tea. He was doing nothing else. He poured it into a tin cup and set the cup near her hands and went back to where he had been sitting and picked up a piece of leather he had been working and went back to working it. The tea steamed. She watched it for a long time before she picked it up. She woke to fire and did not know where she was, and her first thought was a weapon. There was none near her. She lay still and let her eyes move through the lodge and found him asleep on the far side, and found the smoke hole above with the gray of early morning in it, and found the fire between them burning low and patient. Outside the wind had stopped. The silence after a blizzard has a weight to it, a particular pressure, like something holding its breath. She sat up. The robe fell from her shoulders, and the cold touched her skin, and she pulled it back. He was still asleep, or appeared to be, and she studied the lines of him in the firelight, the breadth of his shoulders, the way his breathing moved in him, slow and unhurried as the seasons. She had slept in the same space as a man before, and it had never looked like this. It had never been something she could watch without her stomach going to water. By mid-morning, the camp was alive around her. She did not know how many lodges, 8 or 9. Women moved between them with the efficiency of people who know exactly what winter requires. Children ran. A dog nosed through the snow at the edge of the camp and found nothing and wandered on. He brought her moccasins, set them at her feet without a word and walked away, and she put them on because her own boots had split somewhere in the days of running, and her feet were wrapped now in strips of her own dress hem, and the moccasins were warm and fit, as though someone had measured her in her sleep. She was looking at her feet when the shouting started. 2 men came through the camp carrying a third between them, and the third man's side was dark with blood, and the women moved, and Della moved with them because her hands knew what to do before her mind gave permission. She pushed through to the wounded man and knelt and opened his shirt and looked at what was there and said, in English, "I need yarrow, or sage. Bring me a coal from the fire." No one understood her words. She mimed what she needed with her hands, and one of the women went and came back with a coal in a clay dish, and Della took it and breathed on it and packed the wound the way her grandmother had packed wounds, the way knowledge passed down through hands and not through language. The man's breathing steadied. She sat back on her heels and her hands were dark with his blood, and she looked up, and Kohana was standing at the edge of the circle watching her. Not with surprise, with something more careful than surprise. She looked away first. That evening he brought her food, set the bowl near her hands, and stood there for a moment in which she did not look up, and then he walked away. She listened to his footsteps go. She ate alone in the lodge with the fire speaking its low language, and her hands had stopped shaking, and she did not name the thing that had changed in them. The horses needed moving, and he did not ask her. He only looked at the rope coiled near the lodge door and then at her, and she understood. The river was a mile from camp, and the ice on it had been cracking for 2 days, the sound of it coming through the dark at night like something old and enormous shifting in its sleep. The ponies needed to cross to the grass on the far bank before the ice became impassable, and there were 11 of them and 2 people to move them. The cold that morning had teeth. They worked without speaking because there was no language between them yet except the language of the task, and that one they both knew. He went first across the ice, testing it, the ponies following in the way horses follow a man they trust, and she came behind driving the reluctant ones with her voice and a length of rope, and the ice groaned beneath them in a register she felt in the soles of her feet. The 4th pony went through. Not all the way. Its foreleg punched the ice and the animal screamed, a sound that is the same in every language, and Della was already moving toward it and the ice was flexing under her, and she did not stop. She got her hands under the pony's neck and she pulled, and the pony scrambled, and the ice took her leg to the knee in water so cold it was not even cold anymore, just an absence, a nothing where her leg had been. And then Kohana had the pony's halter and had her arm, and the pony came up onto solid ice, and so did she, and he held her arm a moment after the need had passed. He set her on solid ground. She stood and her leg was soaked to the knee, and the air was turning it to pain, and she looked at the pony which was already steadying, and she looked at his hand still near her elbow, and she thought of her brother who had held her this way once, her brother who had stood between her and Greer's men, and whom they had left in the dirt outside their camp, with his face turned toward the sky. She did not say his name. She had not said his name since they took her. Kohana built a fire on the far bank, and she sat near it and dried her leg, and the ponies grazed in the brown grass behind them, and the river moved under its breaking ice with a sound like distant argument. He sat across the fire from her and cut pemmican, and handed her a piece without looking at her, and she took it and ate it, and the cold in her leg became warmth, and then became ordinary. She did not move away from him that evening at the campfire. She sat where she had been sitting, and he sat where he had been sitting, and the fire moved between them, and the stars above the smoke hole were very bright and very cold and very far, and she did not move away. The riders came at first light, and they flew the brand of the man she had run from. 3 of them on big American horses, loud in the way men are loud when they believe the ground they stand on belongs to them by nature. She heard them from inside the lodge, and she knew the voice of the one in front before she saw his face. Greer's foreman, a man named Pollard who had a stillness about him that was not the stillness of peace. She came to the lodge door and looked out. Kohana stood in the open space between the lodges with his arms at his sides and his face carrying nothing. Pollard was speaking to him in English, loud and slow, as men speak to those they have decided cannot understand them. He said a word for Apache woman that Della had heard before and felt in the same place each time. He said the woman is property. He said there is a legal paper. He said we can do this the easy way. Kohana said nothing. What happens next happens the way violence always happens, not as decision but as weather. Pollard stepped down from his horse, and the other 2 men spread to the sides, and Della came out of the lodge with the hatchet she had taken from beside the fire ring, and the cold air hit her face and she did not feel it. Pollard saw her and smiled. "There she is," he said. "Come on then." She did not go to him. What she thought, in the space between his words and what followed, was not of herself. She thought of Kohana's hand on her arm at the river, and the way he had turned away from her that first night to give her what little a turn back can give, and she thought, "I will not watch him die for this." The man on Pollard's left came for Kohana, and Kohana met him with a speed that did not announce itself, and the man went down, and the man on the right pulled his rifle, and Della was already moving, and she hit him from the side with all of herself, and they went into the snow together, and she had his wrist, and then she had the rifle, and then she was standing with it, and her hands knew how to hold it the same way her hands had known how to pack a wound. Pollard looked at her. She looked back. He was a man who had made calculations all his life about what a woman would and would not do. She watched him make one now. She watched it come out wrong for him. He picked up his man from the ground, and the other man she had put down limped to his horse, and the three of them rode back the way they had come, and did not look behind them, and the sound of their horses went away into the gray morning, and then there was only the camp, and the smoke rising from the lodges, and Kohana standing in the snow with a cut above his eye that ran dark down his cheek. She walked to him. She looked at the cut. She pressed the hem of her sleeve against it without asking, and he stood still and let her, and they stood in the open space between the lodges with the whole camp watching, and neither of them said anything, because there was nothing to say that the standing together had not already said. The snow had stopped, and the world was white and still, and her horse was saddled. She had done it herself in the early morning before the camp was fully awake. She did not know why she had done it. Her hands had known what they were doing, and she had let them. And now the horse stood at the edge of camp with its breath clouding, and the open plain lay out before it in every direction, white and enormous, and going on past where the eye could follow. She stood beside the horse. Behind her the camp made its morning sounds. A child, the chunk of wood on wood, the low voices of women starting their fires. She had been in this camp 11 days. She knew the names of 4 children. She knew that the woman called Winona made better coffee than anyone had a right to in this country, and that the old man at the north end of camp had a laugh that started in his chest before it reached his face. She knew that Kohana slept on his left side, and that he rose before dawn, and that he had not once in 11 days looked at her, as a man looks at something he owns. She put her hand on the saddle. The leather was cold, and she felt the cold, and she felt the horse shift its weight under her hand, and she stood there for a long time in which the plain went on being the plain, and the sky went on being the sky, and the world did not offer her anything except itself, which is all it ever offers anyone. She unsaddled the horse. She did it methodically, the cinch and the girth and the blanket beneath, and she carried the saddle back into camp and set it where it belonged, and the horse wandered to the others and put its nose down to the snow. Kohana was at the fire. He had seen her. He did not say anything about what he had seen. She went into the lodge, and she took the blanket she had been given, and she hung it on the line beside his, the red wool of it bright against the brown of his robe, and then she sat down by the fire and held her hands out to it, and the warmth came into them finger by finger. He came in and sat across from her. She did not look up. After a while she said in English, because it was the only language they shared, and they had been building it word by word between them like a bridge across something wide, she said, "I don't know your word for stay." He told her. She said it back imperfect. And he did not correct her, and the fire moved between them, and outside the wind had come up again, and was moving through the grass, and the horse had found a patch of brown grass beneath the snow, and was working at it with its teeth, and the smoke went up through the smoke hole into the white morning, and she held her hands near the fire, and they were still.